The V-shaped recovery is unlikely. Let's have a look. Hello everyone, Florian.Heise here and welcome to another episode of HeiseSays. I have my morning stein of coffee and I thought we'd have a look at this article discussing, well, the unlikeliness of a quick economic recovery. Now, if you've been following the channel, often we'll hear from our political leaders that we're bridging to the future and that we'll have a V-shaped recovery. It will bounce right back, particularly the RBA. And I often bring up one of my favorite charts. This is the wage price index forecasts from the RBA. Their ability to predict the future. Haven't been very good, haven't been doing too well. I'm sure they'll get it right this time. I'm sure if they say we'll have a V-shaped recovery, then maybe we will. Actually, does anyone know if there's a way? Could you bet on this? Could you go against the predictions of the RBA? Maybe sports bet. Maybe an option. We'll have to see, guys. So let's have a look. This is from the ABC News. A quick bounce back unlikely for the Australian economy post-pandemic despite political optimism. Well, I can't say I'm surprised. I'm of the same opinion, to be honest, because we're so dependent on foreign resources. Just look at our tourism industry, guys. 60.8 billion, 3.1% of the national GDP. 666,000 employees, a big chunk of the workforce, 5% of the workforce, everyone. 5%. 4.6% of our exports. That's 39.1 billion. Now, you'd be a fool to not think that industry is getting hammered. Now, let's just compare it. What I'll do is I will bring up one of my favorite websites, because I think it's very useful to compare these numbers. Because 39 billion. What is 39 billion compared to other industries? Well, iron ore is 48 billion. Coal is 47 billion. We're the biggest iron ore exporter on the planet, everyone. If you didn't know that, Australia's pretty big. Gold, 29 billion. So our tourism industry is bigger than the gold exports Australia makes. And guess who's the biggest gold exporter in the world as well? Australia. We may be the world's quarry, but we're a bloody good quarry at that. Petroleum gas, 20 billion, bigger than that. So there you go. From our natural resource exports, it looks like, well, tourism's only beat by iron ore and coal. Then if we add international education to that, that's I think bigger than coal. It's about 60 billion last time I looked. So these things are going to take a hit due to just the global economic lockdown, pandemic, and, well, remember the bushfires we had that was spreading terror? Everyone was afraid of coming to Australia, all the news reports. That was going to be a hit to tourism before any of this happened. We've all forgotten about it now, haven't we? So, when will the penny drop? Better still, make that $1. It's now becoming clear that even if we do go back to some semblance of normality, whatever that may be, it will be a much longer climb back than our leaders are willing to concede. Hope springs eternal in the halls of power. In times of great uncertainty such as these, it's about all we have to cling to. Well, yes, I think there are a lot of people, very hopeful. I've noticed I put a thing on the community tab for my YouTube. I'm getting hammered by real estate adverts. And I mean, that's not surprising with the content I produce and the videos I look at, but I've just noticed a big uptick in them. A big uptick. So more advertisers are discussing, investing in real estate, investing in property. Here's my property scheme. Sign up to this. Let me know in the comments if you're experiencing it too. Maybe now's the time, or perhaps people are getting a bit hungry. So on Friday, the Reserve Bank forecast unemployment would hit 10% this year and remain high until the end of next year. Now, if we look at the Roy Morgan data, they have an alternative methodology to the Reserve Bank. They're already saying unemployment is higher than that. But the figure I'm most interested in is the combined unemployment and underemployment, which is sitting around 25% of the workforce right now. They don't mention that in any of these articles, do they? But it's concerning. And the reason the RBA they need to be consistent with their methodology is because they need to be able to look back at historical data. They really should be doing two surveys, two methodologies, and comparing them, but then that would question the validity of the first, wouldn't it? Despite this, it was forecasting what is known in the game as a V-shaped recovery. where once we get through the health crisis, the economy will quickly rebound back to where it was. Prime Minister Scott Morrison and Treasury are even more optimistic, forecasting a snapback with 800,000 jobs returning in no time at all, and they're not alone. What do you think, everyone? Do you think that seems reasonable? I don't. Not at all. There's going to be lasting economic impacts to this. There'll be businesses who just maybe struggle to keep people on using the JobKeeper, and then when they open up, business just isn't going to return. Cash flow just isn't going to return, and they'll go, nah, I'm out. I'm over. I've had enough. There'll be people that have lived a different life, maybe working from home, and will change the demand for other services. There's another article I want to look at about the growth in homeschooling. People have been thrust into homeschooling and go, wait a minute, this is actually really good. We're going to stick with it. So there's going to be changes to people's behavior. I think there can be some good benefits coming out of this, to be honest. Imagine how much time we'll save if people don't have to commute as often. So one viewer was saying she loves working from home now. She doesn't have to commute. She just drove in to get a work laptop they gave her. She doesn't want to go back. I had a client tell me the same thing. I tell you, I like it. I've been doing it for a couple of years now. Once we moved the office back home, I set up here. And then I realized, wait a minute, I'm saving all this time. I don't have this commute anymore. You know what I'll do? I'll start doing YouTubing. There you go. So the UK was facing the worst economic downturn in 300 years, it announced, but the bounce would be equally as speedy as the decline. Despite the chutzpah, stunned economists were quick to shoot down the rosy projections. The IMF, International Monetary Fund, similarly loudly has embraced the V. But as the damage bill continually rises, that V has started to look more like a U, or even more worryingly, perhaps even an L. It could be just because it was VE day. That has to be it. That's what. This time around, it is governments on the hook for the bailouts. This time, there will be only limited help from central banks. For this, in the first major recession the world has entered in more than 5,000 years, where interest rates are at zero. Well, I mean, come on, guys. Central banks haven't been around 5,000 years. It's pointless. And the biggest issue is this is the first major recession the world has entered into, where you've got, fake money created by all these central banks, where they can just make infinite supply. If we're going to compare that, let's look at nations that had a similar monetary system hundreds or thousands of years ago. What happened when they just started printing money? I'm sure they thought they knew what they were doing. I'm sure they thought it was all fine. Piper always gets paid in the end. Central banks, while not entirely out of ammunition, already have spent their entire arsenal of conventional weaponry. Interest rates policy is now impotent. No, they'll go negative. And then what they'll do is they'll create an exchange rate between a digital currency and a physical currency to remove that opportunity for you to escape the negative interest rates to encourage spending. That's what they'll do. The cash ban, really, I mean, it's kind of pointless in some regards. Them implementing it, they don't need to. It's just the first step. Australians are very compliant, very well behaved. And honestly, tax is a pain in the ass sometimes when you just tap. And think of all that marketing data you create for MasterCard that they can sell and Visa can sell when you tap. You've got to think about those poor businesses. While our federal and state governments have handled the health crisis brilliantly, Australia and New Zealand are outliers. The pandemic has swept through the developed world and has only begun to wreak havoc in developing nations. It's likely to have a lasting and long impact on the global economy. Consumer behavior will change. Businesses will be hesitant to invest, and considering that borrowing for businesses is one of the main strategies that the RBA is using, I still don't know why. Who would borrow in this climate? And it is as in almost every other recession, armies of workers will struggle to earn a wage. National or even regional recessions can be devastating enough. Global recessions are something else again. Australia is a small export-orientated country at the whim of global forces. Yes, no, we definitely are. A protracted downturn in the US, where the unemployment rate is estimated at 15%, and continued sluggishness in China will have a direct impact on us. So far, we have been relatively insulated from the forces wreaking havoc on global commerce. Unlike previous recessions, and particularly during the global financial crisis a decade ago, governments around the world have been quick to fork out the cash. This has enabled spending momentum to be maintained, significantly easing the pain. When it comes to bailouts, our response has been right up there. A study by BIS Oxford Economics last week ranked Australia's financial support packages as the second largest in the world, beaten only by Qatar. Wow. So good, so proud for Australia to be there. Bloody hell. The 46 countries surveyed so far had thrown a collective $13 trillion at supporting their economies. At $214 billion may seem small in comparison, but our direct financial injection when measured against GDP was 10% of our economy. Do you think people are money hoarding or paying down debt? Is that why we're not seeing that work through to inflation? I suspect it is. The US had spent 6.9%, UK 3.1%. But what if all this goes on for much longer than expected? A vaccine, if one can be produced at all, is still a long way off. Will we be able to afford continued support for the unemployed and for businesses laid waste by the pandemic? Mindful of the debt bill that future generations will need to repay, Mr. Morrison and Treasurer Josh Frydenberg have been adamant the Job Keeper and Job Seeker programs will be finite and they'll end in 6 months. Well, they're also talking about ending it even sooner now. But consider this, if the Reserve Bank projections are correct and unemployment remains elevated until the end of next year with a 7% jobless rate, what will happen to the economy if the one thing propping it up suddenly is removed? Will landlords continue to forgive rent? Will the banks ignore the mounting toll of soaring debts? Unlikely. There you go. And that's why when people are saying, buy now, why aren't they thinking of this? Here's the thing. I mean, if you could buy a property now and you could maintain it healthily on the dole, there you go. Will that mitigate your risk? Perhaps. It's up to you to consider. But what can you get for that these days? Not those $700,000 starter homes they're talking about in Sydney. I mean, that's just crazy. The RBA and its V for victory. Every 3 months, the Reserve Bank issues a statement of monetary policy. It's supposed to be a look at how we're travelling and where we might be headed. For quite a few years now, it has copped its fair share of criticism for overly rosy projections about the economy. Really, I'm not surprised. I mean, honestly, I haven't been looking at it that close until I started doing YouTube, and yeah, it's crazy. It's utterly crazy. I mean, if in business you made this many mistakes, would you still be in business? Everything from wages growth and economic growth to inflation and even the outlook for interest rates have painted a picture of Australia emerging from a rough patch and towards sunny skies. None of this has eventuated. On Friday, it again was forecasting a recovery. Its presentation was full of V's, employment, GDP, the whole gamut. The only problem was the right-hand side of the V's don't quite match up to the left-hand side. I mean, here we can see. Sure. What do you think, guys? Let me just bring up my favorite RBA chart. So, based on their failure here, say 2011, we could use the very scientific method to maybe argue that that is what will happen. That's pretty scary, isn't it? 2 years out from now, according to the projections, we still won't be back to anywhere near where we were a few months ago. Take a look at the Reserve Bank's graph on employment and hours worked. While it shows that by the end of next year, a great many Australians will be employed, just a few months ago will be jobless. And of those with work, many won't be working the hours they'd like, which adds up to a much lower level of income. Exactly. The underemployment rate that needs to be discussed. It needs to be reported on the news. This means less spending and lower profits for businesses. Bear in mind, this follows a protracted period of painful weak wages growth, which has weighed on consumption and economic growth well before the pandemic hit. The figures above are the baseline figures, the most likely outcome. There's also a set of super rosy projections where we get a vaccine or the virus disappears and everything magically returns to normal. Okay, yeah, let's not even bother. And there's another where the virus reappears, lockdowns are reimposed, and the economy nosedives. Yeah, that's one I suspect may occur. So no easy answers for government in the post-lockdown economy. Out there in investment world, confusion reigns supreme. The broader market is still way down from its peak earlier this year, putting it into a technical bear market. But in a weird quirk, it has bounced back from its March 23 lows by more than 20%, putting it into a technical bull market. Yes, it's funny how that happens, isn't it? Well, are we looking at a dead cat bounce? I know it's higher, I'm just bringing it up now. I know it's higher than what people would anticipate, but these are, well, once-in-a-lifetime events. We'll have to see. How's the dollar going? Oh, we're 65 cents. Dollar's gone up. So, glass half full or half empty, the choice is yours. 3 of our big 4 banks reported half-year earnings in the past fortnight. Each announced billion-dollar plus hits from projected raises in bad debt. 2 suspended dividends, and the NAB slashed its payout to the bone. But each has wildly different views of the future, and particularly the expected downturn in the housing market. Commonwealth Bank this week will complete the picture with its update. Tomorrow was supposed to be budget day. It was supposed to be the day a triumphant Treasurer Frydenberg announced the first surplus in more than a decade. It will probably go unmarked. But the betting is that when this year's deficit is announced later this year, a lethal combination of soaring unemployment, depressed housing prices, and already spent Reserve Bank will blow out the anticipated shortfall for this year and for the foreseeable future. Politically, the government is on a hiding to nothing. If it extends the welfare package, it will be accused of blowing the budget for generations to come. If it doesn't, the recovery will take even longer and cost society even more. Here's the argument I would make. Rather than extending welfare, I understand. If they're going to burn a hole in the budget, they need to do innovative reforms. They need to experiment with ways of reducing the burden on people. I'd love to see just an experiment. Turn Brisbane into a special economic region. Cut all taxes. Do something to make it easier for businesses, for people to take those loans that the RBA is throwing at you. Create something to encourage workers. Maybe give the option that, in this special economic region, you are allowed to withdraw a bit more of your super to use for a home deposit, to use for an investment, to use to pay off debt. What do you think's better? The return or the losses that you're getting in super, or the guaranteed return of 20% you can get if you decimate credit card? Do you think they'll be brave enough to explore these options? This is one argument why I say we need to shift the window, why we need to have a mix of politicians in Parliament, not just people you like, and don't put all your faith in one party. You want to mix and debate so more ideas get at least thrown on the table. Anyway, guys, what do you think? Do you trust the RBA? Do you think we're heading for a V-shaped recovery? Or do you think it's going to be prolonged or L-shaped? As always, let me know your thoughts, opinions in the comments below. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you're a fan and you want to support us, there are a few ways you can. You can join us on YouTube or Patreon. You can support us via our affiliate links at Amazon or eBay or Independent Reserve and Kucoin. You can use Gold Pass from the Perth Mint. You can buy a merch from HeiseSays or via PayPal. Take care, everyone. I'll see you in the next video.